What's going on, people? Welcome back to Curtis Shaw TV, back with another live stream, and it is January. The January transfer window is open, and it's only right that I get good friend of the channel, transfer expert Ben Jacobs, in the building. How are you, Ben?
I'm good. Happy New Year. Great to be here. Not just me, but some who are eagle-eyed will see my dog lurking in the background as well.
Yeah, you got to look after them, you know. But I thought I would start off today's show. A lot of people have been saying it in the comments. Obviously, the sad news about Gianluca Vialli passing away. I don't know about you, but for me, growing up, Italian football was sort of my go-to league outside of England. You know, I loved Italian football as a young striker. You know, Vialli, Inzaghi, all these, you know, Italian strikers. So obviously sad news, and thoughts go out to his family. And I just wondered if you wanted to add anything on that, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. Came across Gianluca Vialli many times as both a journalist, and then after he finished playing, he went into punditry, and our paths crossed on a number of occasions, particularly when I was in the Middle East and North Africa. And I think there was just a suaveness and elegance and innate charm about Luca that was so endearing. He was full of charisma, oozing with personality, and one of those names that just excited. So when we think about the Premier League and how elite level players came over there, some will say, depending on what generation you are, Vialli, others a Zola or a Klinsmann or a Bergkamp, if we bring it back to Arsenal. And I think he was just one of those names that everything he did on and off the field had a uniqueness, had a energy, had a hunger, had a charm, and most importantly, really, because this is what life is about, had a smile. He enjoyed everything that he did. And unfortunately, we lost him to pancreatic cancer. He battled it hard. He was brave. He was strong. He was open about the struggle. And my thoughts and prayers go out to his family. And of course, we'll remember him in a variety of different ways. The Italian football side, as you said, he won Serie A with Sampdoria, with Juventus. He won the Champions League with Juventus. He was a world record signing at the time for Juventus. But when he moved to Chelsea, it obviously brought some of that Italian football, like when Zola moved as well, I think, to the Premier League. And he not only was an outstanding player, but also player manager as well. And with Chelsea, he won the FA Cup as both a player and a manager as well. And two quick things leap out for me. One is his first game as player manager in February 1998. This is not a great story to tell on an Arsenal show because, of course, it's against Arsenal in the League Cup, and Arsenal had a 2-1 lead and Chelsea overturned that. But before the game in the dressing room, he popped open a couple of bottles of champagne, gave everybody a glass to calm them down, which is unthinkable in modern football. And I remember when Arsene Wenger, for example, used to hand out jelly babies at half time, and people laughed at how unscientific it was, but ultimately it was just a boost of sugar. And this was a tactic to calm his team. No one's saying they went out drunk, by the way. I'm sure that they just took slight of sips and it was as much symbolic. But then those bottles were left out, and when they won and subsequently ended up lifting the League Cup, they beat Middlesbrough in the final. Then they were able to take that same champagne after that win over Arsenal, and of course when they also were victorious, and drink it a bit more aggressively and get some team unity. And this was decades ago, and football has changed, but that uniqueness, that decision to kind of go from player to manager at a big club at the time and succeed in that manner and use unorthodox techniques to bring his team together was astonishing. And the other story was just against Tromsø in Europe in the snow. And Chelsea actually lost the first leg. They ended up going through, but they were defeated 3-2. Vialli got 2 late goals in the game. But there he was in the snow, playing in a blizzard in a match that probably now would never have taken place. And how many times do we joke very glibly about, can so-and-so do it on a cold Tuesday night in Stoke, we say, don't we? And Vialli was like that. He was at his best, thriving under pressure, different conditions, different dressing rooms, different languages. And he just had that ability to unite people with his personality and his charm. And of course, he'll be dearly missed.
100%. Listen, I'm going to say that Chelsea were drunk. That's why they beat us. I think they were a bit tipsy that day. But no, listen.
You can say that. I can't.
Yeah, I know. No, listen, and just briefly, Ben, before we get into the transfers and stuff, you did some great work at the World Cup, and I just wanted to know from somebody who was over there and worked over there, what was the feeling like over there? Because a lot of people, some people have said one of the best World Cups ever, one of the safest World Cups, very well organized, no real fan trouble. What was the World Cup experience like for you?
It was brilliant from a football perspective. I always say we have to look at Qatar, as many of us did beforehand, during, and also after, in the context of lots of different areas. And that still includes human rights and inclusivity. But if we're only talking about the football side, an outstanding tournament full of drama. And not only did we see the Lionel Messi fairy tale, but what a brilliant run from Morocco. Croatia went far again, as they always seem to do. And Luka Mudryk was therefore able to seemingly bow out on a relative high. He would have liked to go into the final, but third place, not bad. And I say seemingly because he's now going to continue for a little bit longer with the Croatia national team. Saudi Arabia caused a shock against the now world champions, Tunisia. Beat France. So lots of different plot lines. And I think there was just gripping drama everywhere. I think back to the Argentina-Netherlands game as well, and how almost Louis van Gaal was able to knock out Argentina. So they rode their luck at times, but that's part of the drama of football. And we couldn't have got a better final in the sense that Messi and Mbappe both stood up, and neither of them deserved to lose. And then it, of course, ended up going to penalties, and Argentina and Lionel Messi won the World Cup. And beyond just the football side, I think the thing to point out is that we start with a very English or European football mentality around what we think the game is. And football is nobody's game. It's everybody's game. And each fan and each team has a slightly different way of doing it. And what was great, and I knew this because I've lived out, including in Qatar and Dubai. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've been out to Bahrain as well. So this was not a shock to me. I'm very familiar with Doha. But what was clear from this World Cup is the way in which those, particularly from the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, consume football is so different to the European or certainly the British experience. And alcohol wasn't missed in the slightest in and around the stadiums. It was safe. It was clean. And there's definitely something in a one city World Cup. Because if you're going over as a fan, you can stay in the same hotel. You can consume more games beyond just the country that you've flown over to support. And in addition to that, you get a very cosmopolitan atmosphere because the English fans can engage with teams outside of their group in the early part of the tournament. So they can banter with Germany when they got knocked out, but they can also go down to the souk and have a late meal and surround themselves by locals from Qatar, Saudi Arabian supporters celebrating the victory over Argentina, and get caught up in all of that. So it was very cosmopolitan. It was very accessible. It was very clean, and it was very safe. So once again, I reiterate that we can't ignore the backdrop. We can't ignore the human rights issues. And it's very important now that the local organizing committee and the broader Qatari government live up to what they said they're going to do, which is not just put on an outstanding World Cup, and it was from a football perspective, but also provide a legacy. And now they have to keep their word, and they've always intimated that they will, and improve conditions and make sure that there is a long-term legacy so the World Cup does generate positive change. And we can't take the limelight away from Qatar. Otherwise, there is always a risk that things take a step backwards. But genuinely, the actual Qatari organizing committee is not only full of locals, it's not only full of government members. There's large Western representation that are friends of mine and that have been working tirelessly for the best part of a decade to try and create change and be as socially conscious as they can be within the cultural confines or legal confines. And this is why you have to break down the issues ultimately, because not every single issue is easily fixable, but there has to be a desire to improve. And obviously, when we're talking about the inclusivity to, for example, the LGBTQ plus community, or when we're talking about basic human rights for migrant workers, or when we're talking about compensation funds for existing migrant worker deaths or injuries, these things need to be changed and rectified Otherwise, the World Cup passes and people that have been affected by it in a negative sense become forgotten. So I'll never just only come on, even though this is a long-winded answer, and say the football was great. I enjoyed it there. We have to, as journalists, be socially conscious and make sure that we don't forget about the backdrop to the World Cup. But I have to say the biggest thing for me, right at the start of the answer, as I reiterated, is just that a one-city World Cup makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I think you make some great points there, and obviously the next World Cup's going to be a lot more spread out over 3 countries. So, you know, we're not gonna get that same thing. Listen, the main thing that I brought you on here for, obviously, is to talk transfers, and I was very keen on getting you on today because obviously one of the players that we're being closely linked with, Mudryk, is a player that, of course, you have interviewed. And a very good interview as well. And he spoke quite openly, which I think surprised a lot of people. Obviously, Arsenal have had, according to reports anyway, a couple of offers rejected for Mudryk so far. We saw Dario Serna, who is, I think, the sporting director of Shakhtar. He was at Stamford Bridge last night with Willian and former Arsenal player Eduardo as well. Basically, what is the latest as you know it with this transfer? I think we thought this was a one-horse race and he was going to come to Arsenal. Now Chelsea are involved. Sterling and Pulisic get injured last night, which again makes their need maybe for a winger even greater. First of all, when you interviewed him, how did he come across when you spoke to him?
Well, I think Mykhailo Mudryk is highly ambitious. He's very much a modern breed of footballer that wants to add strings to his bow, and that's where the appeal is. Arsenal don't just think they're signing a left winger. They believe that he can play for longer periods in central areas, switch sides under game management, and even if asked to, play deeper as a kind of inverted fullback. And they certainly want to develop those defensive qualities. So top players can't do everything, and he needs an identity at the moment. That's as a left winger who loves to run and cut inside. He's a relatively clinical finisher. He's got a lot of speed. He's got a lot of energy. But the most striking thing for me is just the humbleness and the ambition. He's the first to training. He's the last to leave. He does a lot of side gym work. He is data orientated. He is science orientated. And at Shakhtar, he's very much just kept his head down and tried to improve. And this is what's going to change if he gets a big move, because the resources will increase, the data will increase, the science will increase, the media glare will increase. But I think what you're going to see is a relatively humble player. And we shouldn't be misguided by what we're seeing on Twitter from the Mudryk account, because of course he's dropping hints and everybody knows now that he wants the Arsenal move. But he's also very respectful of Shakhtar. And when you do business with Shakhtar, it's an extremely atypical deal, because there's a lot more voices involved. You need local knowledge to get it done, which is why Arsenal have, in addition to holding direct talks, be using intermediaries. And on top of that, there's lawyers, there's quite an aggressive president. So Shakhtar and deals are not easy for any player. And therefore, what we're seeing now is not a situation playing out in an atypical way. And if it drags on, it will be no surprise, because this is how Shakhtar do business. And it's also why Arsenal didn't entertain a bid over the course of the last window, which is interesting, because ultimately a few good Champions League games and a high level of interest have now raised the price significantly. But had Arsenal just moved over the summer, they would have been able to get Mudryk for 45 million euros. Everton had a bid rejected for 30 million euros. Shakhtar said they wanted 45, and all of the interested parties at that point didn't want to pay that much money. And now, of course, if we compare the rejected Everton bid, and there was interest from Brentford as well, to the lower end of the asking price, it's still double what Everton saw rejected. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if somebody had bid 45 million euros, sources have said this very openly, last summer, they'd have sold. But the price has gone up, and Shakhtar are even more bullish, because obviously they want a good season. They want to make sure that they're in Champions League football again. And losing Mudryk mid-season is not their ideal scenario unless their price point is hit. So when I interviewed Mudryk, I got a real sense that he loves Arsenal. He said that very openly, that Mikel Arteta is the right kind of coach for him. He's subsequently spoken to Zinchenko about settling. And again, the likelihood of an Arsenal transfer doesn't just come from the fact that Mudryk wants the move. It's also because he's spoken to Arteta, heavily involved in the pitch. He's been given a plan, not just in terms of any game time should he join, but also his longer term development and coaching. And he's very keen to move to London, which obviously Chelsea could play into as well. But on the Chelsea side, even though, as you rightly said in your question, they may have more of an urgency, and even though Todd Boehly is highly ambitious, Chelsea will want to know categorically from the Mudryk end, if they were to have an offer accepted, has Mudryk got any interest whatsoever in joining Chelsea? And as long as Arsenal remain in the race for Mudryk, Mykhailo Mudryk only wants Arsenal, which means that Chelsea's only opportunity of getting Mudryk ahead of Arsenal is if Arsenal exit the race for Mudryk. And Arsenal will exit the race for Mudryk if their own top-end valuation doesn't get accepted. So, of course, Chelsea can just highball and meet Shakhtar's valuation, but that's not a sensible tactic. They're not going to come in significantly different to Arsenal at this point, if, and it's still an if, they choose to bid. They like the player, but they're not going to suddenly put 20 million euros higher than Arsenal's last offer just for the sake of it to try and win a race. And if they progress, they still need to know that Mykhailo Mudryk will join Chelsea and won't turn around and say it's Arsenal or nothing, which is one option. I don't want to paint that as the most likely option, but Arsenal could turn around and say, we'll come back for Mudryk in the summer when the price will drop a little bit. And Mudryk could say, I'll see out the season with Shakhtar because that's what Shakhtar ideally want. And then we'll discuss it again in summer. Because coming back to what you asked originally, he's not that kind of player to force a move in the sense of Wesley Fofana did when he joined Chelsea and sit on the bench and sulk or say he doesn't want to train. He is hinting at a move with all of these social media signs. But again, it's really, really clear. And I've spoken on record to Dario Serna and to Mykhailo Mudryk. And it's really clear that there is huge respect between those two and huge respect between Shakhtar and Mudryk and the president and Mudryk. So Mudryk also said in that interview, it's not only my decision, which means, he wants the move. And yes, he wants the move now. But his tactic to get the move, even with these hints and likes on social media, won't be, for example, to refuse to play for Shakhtar or to throw his toys out the pram. He's not that kind of character.
I mean, from an Arsenal point of view, for me, what I kind of wanted to know from you is, it's interesting that the price is so high and they keep referring to this Anthony deal, which I understand a selling club is going to try and maximize it. And apparently Arsenal are saying, look at the Gakpo deal. Why do you think the price is so high for a player that is coming from outside one of the major leagues? I don't think he's even got more than 15 caps for Ukraine. You know, why do they feel that he is worth maybe in the region of 80 million euros? They're saying Arsenal might have to break their transfer record to get him through the door.
Well, it's modern football, isn't it? It's demand, it's mid-season. He's had an excellent run in the Champions League. He's 22 years of age. He's got pace, he's got physicality, he's got an eye for goal, and he's got versatility to develop. So you've got a very high ceiling. And then the wages are not especially high by Premier League standards either. So you're suddenly getting a goal scorer and assister with a heavy drive who could be one of the best players in the world if he joins the right club and gets coached in the right way. And Shakhtar are not exaggerating when they say that. He might not be in that category right now, but give it a season or two and he could be right up there with the very best. He's probably within the top 15 or 20. I think that Shakhtar say he's one of 3 in his position that is the best. And maybe on current form, maybe on a few Champions League displays, they've got a point. But I think the other thing is that in your question, you talked about why is the fee so high. It's not as high as many believe, in the sense that Shakhtar, again, tough negotiators, they'll publicly call for 100 million euros and they will try and get the best possible payment structure. in addition to that, they'll drum up as much interest as they can. And the links with Chelsea, the narrative around meeting Chelsea before they talk to Arsenal again is all geared around creating a bidding war. And that will have high prices that are suggested. And Shakhtar are happy to allow that type of angle to be fueled. But privately, I've always been told by sources that they would entertain offers in the mid-60s and were hoping for something between 70 and 80 million euros, depending on the structure. And that's where we're at the moment. Arsenal's first bid was not really a bid. It was more of a marker. This is how you negotiate with Shakhtar. You put something down that's actually quite a high number. It was higher, the first bid, than Shakhtar were expecting, but of course it was very add-on heavy. And then the second bid that's come in has been adjusted to have a bigger guaranteed fee, but is still just under 70 million euros. And Arsenal would like to pay 70 to 75 million euros at the top end. And then depending on Chelsea, depending on how badly they want the player, and most importantly, depending on the structure of the deal, are they prepared to go up to 80 million euros? And I think that there's high confidence that within this ballpark, a deal will get done. And the higher Arsenal go, the more they'll want the structure in their favour. So they'll revert maybe back to add-ons to get to the deal. And then we wait and see what Chelsea do in terms of, are they going to offer Shakhtar a lump sum up front if they bid? And I keep using the word if, because at the time of recording, Chelsea have held meetings and they may have made verbal indications of the direction of travel, but they've not put down anything formally, whereas Arsenal have had 2 bids. And then just on the second bid, it's also worth clarifying that when you get to a second bid or a third bid, and this is for any player, a rejected bid will often be denied because it's not in the interest of the buyer or the seller to even acknowledge that there was a bid. And similarly, if the clubs are still talking, they may not even confirm that anything has been rejected at the other extreme, because if they're still in dialogue. So this is something that fans don't always appreciate, that if you bid once, twice, 3 times, and then walk away, the buyer and the seller will probably say there was never even a bid, because they don't want to put it out there in the market. If you get a rejected bid and you're still talking, they may deny it's been rejected. And this is the grey area we're in now with Arsenal, that they've put down a formal second offer, and some suggest that bid has been rejected, but it hasn't been rejected in the formal dismissed sense. It's been verbally rejected in the sense that there is no done deal at that exact amount and that exact structure. So the next thing that happens is a kind of verbal finessing and a back and forth, where effectively you're dealing with the framework of a second bid because it's getting closer and you need to move fast in January. So you can't keep going away, taking internal meetings as Arsenal, then formally making a third bid, a fourth bid, a fifth bid, and then waiting. So what you do is through intermediaries and through club to club talks, talk back and forth to work out what you're going to have to bid for a third bid or however far along you are in order to get it accepted. Because January, there's no time to mess around. There's no time to play games. There's no time to walk away from Mudryk and then come back at the end of the window. Otherwise, Shakhtar may decide they don't want to sell, or Chelsea might have muscled in. So we have to be very careful when we use the word rejected, because it implies failure. And actually, rejection is more of a tactic. And as long as there is two-way dialogue, then from Arsenal's perspective, things continue to head in the right direction.
I mean, that what you've said there at the end of your point there, things head in the right direction. I think as Arsenal fans, you know, we've had some tough Januaries in the past. Last year, another example of that, where we didn't get anybody in when we felt we needed. You see Gakpo get announced very quickly. Now, obviously, that's been worked on in the background for however long, you know, and then they announce it. I think Arsenal fans were desperate for this deal to be done at the start of January. They've obviously been talking for weeks, maybe months before. Is the holdup, in your opinion, just then the fact that Arsenal have not met the price and maybe the structure that Shakhtar want? And is the fact that Chelsea are having conversations with Shakhtar, is that delaying their negotiations with Arsenal, with them being involved? Because they will want an auction for him, won't they? They will want it to go as high as possible.
Yeah, but Arsenal won't get involved in a bidding war, as I've said many times.
Yeah.
Arsenal have got a top-end valuation in their heads. They're never going to share the exact number in public because if it gets out, it can weaken your negotiation position. But Arsenal were always going to walk away from Mudryk if that number is not hit. And clearly Arsenal are not prepared to pay anywhere close to 100 million euros for Mykhailo Mudryk, and therefore the whole deal is in Arsenal's control, because this isn't a Rafinha situation, for example. And I know with Rafinha, Barcelona came in and the player wanted Barcelona, but if we take a step back and we explore the scenario before Barcelona came in, Arsenal were leading on Rafinha. Arsenal made a series of bids for Rafinha, and at that point, Barcelona hadn't come in, and it was not clear if they had the financial means. So Arsenal were a little bit confident at that point, and then Chelsea made a bid, quickly agreed a fee with Leeds, and then they thought they were confident, and Arsenal walked away. And in hindsight, Edu will say that they always knew Arsenal, he was going to join Barcelona, so they walked away. But trust me, that's just PR, because Arsenal were panicking at the point when Chelsea bid. And the reason why they were panicking is because Arsenal's opportunism with Rafinha was due to the fact that nothing was clear at Barcelona's end. So they wondered if they could get a quick deal. And then when Chelsea suddenly agreed a fee, Arsenal were like, yikes, what's going on? And the reason why is because Rafinha, if he wasn't going to join Barcelona, and there was no offer at that point on the table from Barcelona, had no preference between Arsenal and Chelsea, and therefore it was a much more open race, presuming Barcelona couldn't come in. They did, and it's all relatively redundant, and now both clubs can put whatever PR they like on that particular narrative. But with Mudryk, it's completely different, because again, Arsenal have bid a couple of times. Chelsea might come in late, but the key difference is, much like Rafinha wanted Barcelona and ended up holding out for them, Mykhailo Mudryk wants Arsenal. So as long as Arsenal are at the table, Chelsea are in a very weak position. And Shakhtar will look to use some kind of Chelsea offer, should it emerge, to force Arsenal's hand a little bit. But I come back to what I said before, that fans are painting Todd Boehly, and I saw this in the comments, so I may as well touch upon it, as some kind of big spending, rash, careless football manager, owner / sporting director. And the worry in this case, therefore, is that they're going to slap down 100 million euros and Arsenal are going to walk away. But that's not how negotiations work. And if you actually look at the Chelsea business, it doesn't marry with that feeling. So everybody was hammering Chelsea for allegedly paying 127 million euros for Enzo Fernandez, but they bid 85 million euros. Everyone was saying it was crazy to get Wesley Fofana for a world record fee. But Chelsea didn't pay a world record fee for Wesley Fofana. Everybody says that Chelsea are nuts to be paying 140 odd million for Declan Rice, 150 million euros for Rafa Leao, but they walked away from Rafa Leao. They refused to pay the release clause. They walked away from Delete because stupid money was being asked for. They didn't entertain talks for Nathan Ake because Manchester City wanted 50 million plus. So there's not too many examples, despite the media reports, of Chelsea actually bidding crazy money for an individual player. With Chelsea, what's apparent is the collective spend is massive. And that's why all these long-term contracts are being handed out, because they have to offset that spend against longer-term contracts, because you can declare the fee against the length of contract under financial fair play. So the big spending doesn't impact financial fair play if you get a long contract, because you can offset it over more cycles and divide the cost, because it's not about the fee or the payment structure under financial fair play. It's about the amount you pay divided by the contract length. So the longer the contract length, the more financial fair play cycles you can spread the cost of that transfer against. And therefore, in that context, this notion that Todd Boehly is suddenly going to go, I want to get Mykhailo Mudryk, I want to beat Arsenal to it, here's 100 million, is crazy. Chelsea are going to come in at a much lower number. Yes, it might be higher than Arsenal's offer, or it just might be a more preferable structure than Arsenal's offer if, and I repeat that, if Chelsea bid, and we'll know more in the next 24 or 48 hours. But Arsenal will have a response. And if Chelsea hit a number that is beyond Arsenal, Arsenal were always going to walk away. And Arsenal feel like the deal is moving in the right direction because they don't believe that either of their bids are non-competitive. They don't believe that Shakhtar are dismissing things out of hand. which is why it's more likely to be about the structure than the number. And by that, I again mean Shakhtar don't only want X amount of money, whether that's 70, 80, 90, 100 million. And to give you an example of that, so those listening understand, if it was 100 million, and I'm going to give you an extreme that clearly isn't matching the reality of the situation, but if Shakhtar are saying we want 100 million and Arsenal say, okay, we'll pay 100 million, but we want to pay you 1 million upfront and 99 million in add-ons, and we want to pay that 1 million in 5 installments, and the add-ons are based upon us winning the Champions League 2 times across the entire contract length, then Shakhtar are only going to get 1 million unless Arsenal win the Champions League twice in the next 5 years. So 100 million means nothing. It's the worst deal in the world. And similarly, if Arsenal come in with their current offer, which is just under 70 million euros, and it's 55 or 60 million up front and 10 million in gettable add-ons, and the payment structure is a lump sum up front, or the whole fee is paid within 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, it's highly preferable towards Shakhtar. And they might add, for example, a sell-on percentage should he go elsewhere, and that might make Shakhtar a bit more money too. So those are the kind of 2 extremes, and obviously the deal will be nowhere near the first example, and probably not quite the second example, but Shakhtar will be pushing for something close to that because they do want 55 million or 60 million euros up front, and then 20, 25 million in gettable add-ons. So this is the finesse, and this is why there's the verbal back and forth. And we as journalists often get told you're rambling, or you're going into too much detail, or what's your point, or is he joining or isn't it joining? That's all we want to know. And again, I reiterate, every single transfer deal, whether you know about it or not, whether we know about it or not as journalists, will have a hijacker, will have a twist, and will not be 100% done until very late down the line. So if you're going to consume a transfer window asking for daily updates, you're going to get a lot of the same. You're going to get a lot of context. You're going to get a lot of insight. You're going to get a lot of moving parts. And then even if you think it's heading in one direction, there could still be a twist. So you either follow the transfer window with the blow by blow, and it's going to be dramatic and it's going to have plot twists like a movie, or alternatively, you get a good night's sleep, you wake up and you wait for Arsenal to confirm whether they are or aren't going to sign Mykhailo Mudryk. And unfortunately, like us or loathe us as journalists, our job is to report. And each day we will endeavor to get an update. And if we can add to the story, if we can add to the context, if we can add to the likelihood, if we can make you better understand the process, we're doing our jobs. So I don't try and clickbait. I don't try and create a false headline that leads you to think Chelsea are prepared to pay bigger than Arsenal, because these things are false in the sense Chelsea are not telling anybody they're prepared to pay bigger than Arsenal. It's the worst negotiation tactic in the world. But there's a strong chance that Shakhtar are briefing that because they want to scare Arsenal. And this is the games of a window, and the media are a part of it. And sometimes we get an exclusive, and sometimes we get a story of our own volition, and sometimes we get told something and we have to double check it, and we get 2 different sides. Like with Enzo Fernandez, Benfica would say one thing and Chelsea would say another, but they are actual club sources. So you know you've got a respectable source, but you know that somebody is ultimately misguiding you, and they're doing so because they want to use the media in order to drive a narrative, which is why Chelsea's lowball offer for Enzo Fernandez only came out after there was a breakdown, because it's in Chelsea's interests, if they're failing, to say, well, we never bid a big number. Otherwise, imagine the message to the market that sends. Chelsea Football Club bid above 120 million euros and they still didn't get the player. Not only does that show that they're paying above the odds, but it shows that they're not getting their business done. So you do have to take a lot of the narrative with a pinch of salt. And therefore, what I try and do is explain that to you with context. And if that's too much context, you go and follow somebody else, or you wait until your club tells you who they have or haven't signed.
You know what it's like with football fans, Ben. We just want instant, quick news. It's that kind of junk food culture in it when it comes to transfer news. But just to round up quickly on Mudryk, anyway, before we move on to 1 or 2 other names. What's your feeling from what's happening at the moment? Would you say that Arsenal are still in pole position, and do do you feel as if there's a deal to be done there this month? I mean, he said to Zinchenko's wife he would be frustrated if he didn't move in winter, but also respectful of Shakhtar if he stayed. Would you, because a lot of people are saying, no, he won't go to Chelsea, he wants Arsenal. But if there's a situation where Chelsea outbid Arsenal, do you think he would consider the Chelsea move if that was the, you know, the main option in terms of him leaving?
Only if Arsenal intimate directly to Mudryk they're not coming back. And then he's got one club. And if they did have an accepted offer, a decision to make between staying at Shakhtar. And again, if Arsenal say, we're never going to come back for you at above X, and if your price isn't going to alter, there's nothing we can do because Shakhtar are really tough negotiators. And that is one scenario, but it's not the most likely scenario at the moment. And Chelsea know that. So first of all, Chelsea have to place an offer. And I can't stress that enough. It might well come and imminently because their interest in the player is genuine. But at the moment, they've held a meeting. They have not made a formal offer. So that changes the dynamic because obviously the first offer, whether it's Arsenal or Chelsea that Shakhtar actually accept, or even one they reject that is higher than the current Arsenal bid, influences the dynamic in the situation. But I reiterate again, Arsenal will not get into a bidding war. So if Chelsea want to win the race for Mudryk, they have to do two things. One, they have to bid above 70 million euros for sure, because Shakhtar have rejected everything below 70 million euros. Two, they have to provide an amazing structure. And then three, they have to get buy-in from Mykhailo Mudryk, which is a process. And Arsenal are currently ahead in the race in all of these aspects because they've held more talks with Shakhtar. Things are moving in the right direction. And Mudryk wants Arsenal. And he doesn't just want Arsenal now. He wants Arsenal as of yesterday, as of Christmas, as of September. If it was up to Mykhailo Mudryk, he'd have been playing in the 0-0 against Newcastle. He'd have been playing in the game against Oxford in the FA Cup on Monday. He's got Arsenal on the brain. And when a player's fixated on a club, it's very hard to change their mind. And that's not just because he loves Arsenal and also he's engaging with the fan base and dropping hints. It's because Mikel Arteta and Edu and Zinchenko and others have pitched to him his entire development to become an elite level footballer. And Chelsea's pitch is not clear. Mykhailo Mudryk and Graham Potter have not held a single conversation yet. So this is about Chelsea's ambition and financial muscle. And as you said a little bit earlier, potentially their need to strengthen in that position. So the first step for Chelsea would be if they proceed a club-to-club agreement. And then if there's an offer with Chelsea that hypothetically was locked in and not one with Arsenal that was locked in, and Arsenal said, we're not going to match that Chelsea offer, and then Shakhtar said, okay, we've got one accepted offer, then it becomes on Chelsea to convince Mykhailo Mudryk that he should give up on his Arsenal dream and join Chelsea instead. And when Arsenal are top of the Premier League, and when Arsenal are flying, and when Arsenal are near guaranteed Champions League football because they've already got a healthy lead between themselves and Tottenham at the moment in 5th place, and when Chelsea are going through upheaval and Chelsea are 10th in the table, there's a big contrast between the two clubs, and Arsenal will capitalise upon that. With Chelsea, they're selling on the strength of a few things: long-term contracts, incentives, and that can lure a player over, and then the overall project, the direction of travel. So Chelsea would be saying to Mudryk, if they ever get to the point of talking to him directly, Christopher Nkunku is coming. We're going to be making heavy investment in the next 2 windows. We're going to be modernising the stadium. We're going to be building a multi-club model. So if you sign for 5 to 7 years, 2 years in or 3 years in, the club you see now will be completely different. And we'll be back where we belong and back what we were winning under Roman Abramovich. And some young players buy into that. But a player like Mudryk may say, I'm really sorry, but I prefer Mikel Arteta to Graham Potter. I prefer first in the table to 10th in the table. I prefer stability to instability. And you can throw all the money you like. But if Arsenal are still at the table, I'm not remotely interested. And at the moment, that is the only key point. It can change. And what people do is they quote you out of context and they say, well, you said Arsenal were confident. You said Arsenal were the more likely to win the race. And yeah, that's true as of now. But Chelsea haven't placed a bid. So we have to wait and see. But the key takeaway is as long as Arsenal are still talking to Shakhtar, they are the favourites to sign Mykhailo Mudryk because he is sold on a move to Arsenal.
And that's the main bit we want to hear, Ben. That's what we're all here for. Just moving on. And by the way, a lot of people are bigging up your jumper sweatshirt. They like it. A lot of people have said it in
Christmas
the comments.
jumper. I'm surprised there's not more comments about the dog behind me.
Yeah, I'm not sure many people have noticed it because the dog looks like it's sleeping. But just moving on, obviously another player that Arsenal have been linked with quite heavily, and a lot of journalists and news outlets are talking about, is Joao Felix of Atletico Madrid. For me, very exciting player. I've always really liked him. Was left out of the squad for Atletico the other day, Copa del Rey. Apparently, George Mendes has had meetings. How is this one going as far as you're aware of it? I know they're asking for this crazy loan fee for him, but do you think there's any room for negotiation there? Could Joao Felix end up in the Premier League at maybe Arsenal?
Well, I think there's three clubs in the race here: Arsenal, Manchester United and Chelsea, and they've all held what I would term different degrees of dialogue. And there's no denying from the Arsenal perspective that Mudryk is the priority, but they want both. So the aim in an ideal window would be for Arsenal to get Joao Felix and Mykhailo Mudryk. If they had to rank them, Mudryk is the priority, which is why they've moved relatively early in the window to try and get a deal done. And then Manchester United, extremely keen as well. Erik ten Hag is desperate to add goals. Manchester United do want more of a traditional number 9, but if they can bring in Joao Felix at a reasonable loan, they would absolutely do that as well. And then Chelsea are kind of there lurking in the background. They haven't moved yet, but the fact that they're exploring Mudryk, if they don't get him, are they then going to accelerate? And the longer the window goes on, the more valuable Joao Felix becomes to a potential buyer if it's a loan deal, because Atleti will, in all likelihood, soften on the finances to some extent. So at the moment, it's a loan fee in excess at a bare minimum of £8 million. And some are even saying it's closer to 10 or 11. And then there is the wage, as I reported about 2 weeks ago, which is 5.3 million across the year, obviously prorated based on how long he stays at the club. And the other thing in all these negotiations, which is key, is if you're going to have that outlay, you want the option to buy. And Atleti are not that keen. Their priority in loaning Felix out is because he's not enjoying life at Atleti. He doesn't get on a professional level or sharing the same football philosophy as Diego Simeone. So it makes sense that Atleti want to get rid. But because of the amount that they paid for him, are they prepared to cut ties or give the club the option to buy if it all works out? And their starting position towards the back end of last year was no. They wanted it to be a straight loan only with sky-high costs. And that's a short-term fix for somebody. So maybe it gives Arsenal a few more goals with Gabi Jesus injured. Maybe it gives Manchester United a few more goals with Cristiano Ronaldo leaving. Maybe it gives Chelsea a few more goals with Amanda Broja out for the season and Raheem Sterling not always playing in his favoured position. But fundamentally, it's not value. Now, as the window drags on, because under FFP, Atleti will want to offload Felix, at least in the short term, they may give a little on the loan fee. I think come what may, they will want any loan buyer to pay 100% of the wages, but the loan fee may come down. And I've always been told that at the top end, a number close to 5 million is what Arsenal, Manchester United and Chelsea want to pay. So that is less than half what Atleti might well be asking for. Even at that lower end number, 8 million, it's still 3 million less. And we wait and see as time ticks away whether anything gets done. There's a feeling that Manchester United are perhaps at this stage, not that I think it will really matter in this context, but slightly ahead, not in the race, but actually in negotiations, because they've already been talking to both Mendes and Atleti about figures. And I think Manchester United, their valuation in terms of the loan fee is actually slightly under 5 million. They'll come in around the 3 or the 4 million mark and then see how things go. Whereas I don't think Arsenal have put down any offer yet, but it can change very quickly. And Atleti are going to keep all suitors informed because that's the way that they can get the highest possible price. But the thing to note is that the longer this goes on in the window, the stronger any suitor for Felix becomes, because it's very clear that Atleti are going to have to get rid of Felix. Otherwise, they become in serious financial trouble. That's number one. And then obviously number two is just, if you're going to get Joao Felix at this rate, signing him on January the 1st means that you're paying a loan fee from January to the end of the season, and you're paying a wage from January to the end of the season. If you get him on the last day of the window, you're losing out on all the games in January, but then you're only paying the loan fee from February till the end of the season and the wages from February to the end of the season. And that is effectively a saving. The ratio is the same in terms of the cost versus the months, but you've got him for less time. So obviously you're not paying as much wages or as much loan fee. So that might persuade someone. And with Manchester United, I think that they're looking at a lot of loans, because the Glazers may well be outgoing in the first or the second quarter of 2023. And a loan, especially if there is an option to buy or an obligation to buy, is very useful to the Glazers, because a small loan fee they'll pay, but by the time it gets to the option to buy, it could potentially be on a new owner, so they can pass on that cost and still help Erik ten Hag strengthen. And this is why loans might be quite valuable to Manchester United in the short term. With Chelsea, they would be prepared to bring in a player like Felix, but they would want that give, making sure that there was that ability to make it long-term, because their whole philosophy with these young players isn't quick fixes. And with Arsenal, I think they're somewhere in the middle. They know they're flying. They know they need a bit of depth. There's urgency to add, because they're in such phenomenal form, and they don't want to have a second half of the season wobble like they did last season that cost them Champions League football. And then we wait and see whether, were they to get Mudryk, does that change anything in terms of Arsenal's approach to Felix? If they didn't get Mudryk, do they suddenly turn around and say, well, we'll pay a bit more. We do want to seriously challenge. We do want to seriously escalate. So again, context is key here. Cost is key here. Value is key here. Option to buy is key here. But for those that just want the simple answer and put it on Twitter in one line, Arsenal want Mudryk and Felix, not Mudryk or Felix.
I mean, that's exciting from an Arsenal point of view. I mean, the reality is obviously a lot different if they could get those two over the line. Do you think there's a scenario potentially where Atleti put an option to buy at the end of it? Because surely from an Arsenal point of view, to pay a big loan fee, pay his wages, potentially put him in the shop window where if he did really well, the fans would love him. We would want him to sign on a permanent. You wouldn't want to pay money. He does really well, and then they bring him back and sell him elsewhere. Do you think there's a possibility of Atleti putting that option to buy in the deal?
Well, I think the suitors want an option to buy come what may, but it just depends at what rate. Options to buy are often gives, and when they're gives, they can be heavily weighted in favour of buyer or seller. So an option to buy is meaningless if it's a price Atleti want that's almost a release clause style price, because Arsenal won't be taking up that option, which means that even if it works out on loan, they'll have to renegotiate. And similarly, if the option to buy is too low, then Atleti panic that Arsenal are getting the best deal in the world, and then they're going to want to up the loan fee to make sure that they get as much value as possible. So a loan deal is complicated. I think sometimes fans think loans are easier because it's ultimately a club that maybe doesn't have to sell, and another club that doesn't have to take as big a risk because they're only bringing someone over on a temporary basis. And then if there's an option, it gives the club a chance to make it permanent. But the complexity comes in the fact that you've got to negotiate that, because if there's an option to buy, you're pre-agreeing terms. So effectively, you've got to negotiate the loan and you've got to negotiate a possible permanent transfer at a rate and on terms, because it could be triggered. And therefore, buyer and seller need a little bit more time in order to come to an agreement. So if you're Atleti, you're probably going to turn around and say, sure, take an option to buy, but it's at 140 million euros. And then you're thinking, brilliant. If Arsenal desperately want the player, they're going to have to pay a Premier League world record. And if they don't want to pay the Premier League record, we've always got the opportunity to reject, whether they offer us 130, 120, 110, or 100. It doesn't matter. We can still turn it down if we want to. And then Atleti have their cake and eat it. They get Felix off the wage bill, and they still have the opportunity. If anything ever changes, if Simeone ever leaves, if the player re-falls in love with Atleti, they still have the option. And that option is based upon the fact that Atleti paid so much. A part of them is quite reluctant just to let him leave on the cheap, which is why they've always said there'll be no cut price deal. So this might seem like it makes sense to the suitors, but to some extent, Atleti at the moment anyway, and it may change as the window progresses, are trying to have their cake and eat it. And that's what makes these kind of deals relatively complicated.
I just want to go for a couple topics because I know you've got to go soon. Big up to everyone tuned in, nearly 3,000 people in the chat. Make sure you like the video and subscribe. Thank you to Ben for coming on. A few people have been asking, have you got a YouTube channel?
No, I'm far too old and far too tired and far too busy to be starting too many channels. You can get the news via Twitter, plain and simple in text. But I do have a TikTok, which is brand new under the handle @BenDavidJacobs. And the TikTok has about 4 things on them, but one is my Mudryk interview and one is my interview with Dario Serna on Mudryk. So 50% of my content at the moment on TikTok is Arsenal.
There you go. There you go. Follow him on TikTok. One player I wanted to ask you about, obviously, for those who don't know, Ben is a Leicester City fan. And we spoke at the start of the season about Youri Tielemans, and a lot of people are saying Arsenal are not being linked with a midfielder. Are we not looking at anyone now? I think Brendan Rodgers has said a few things about him today in the press conference, or about players maybe leaving in general. I'm not sure if he mentioned Tielemans. I think he was speaking about Sionchu, but 6 months left on his deal, Tielemans. No contract signed as of yet. Do you think there's any possibility of him leaving in this window, maybe to Arsenal, or do you think he sees out the contract, or do you think he may even extend his deal if Leicester were to stay up?
Well, Tielemans would go tomorrow if the right offer came in, but Leicester would prefer to keep what they've got because they're so restricted in the market. So in an ideal world, Leicester would like to keep Tielemans and James Maddison as well until the end of the season. Now with Maddison, they can get a fee in the summer. With Tielemans, he'll leave on a free. So a lot just depends, like with the end of the window, really, with lots of interest but nobody moving, if anyone actually makes Leicester a competitive offer. I don't think that Leicester will be that cash conscious with Tielemans now because there's so little left on his contract. So in the summer, they wanted in excess with add-ons included of 30 million. I don't see the valuation being above 15 million now with so little time left on his contract. And Leicester may say 15 million means nothing if we can't replace him. Think about the goals he scored against Wolves and Everton. Think about the fact that he's been the captain for Leicester during certain games this season. And Leicester are struggling. They need to stay up and then they need to reset. And it's not all bad news for Leicester because a lot of their restriction in the market is down to heavy spend on infrastructure. So it's kind of interesting that Brendan Rodgers said, we don't have that many resources, but actually Leicester foundationally have amazing resources now. They've got a world-class training facility and they are renovating the King Power Stadium. So the structure of the club is actually very healthy, but it comes at a cost when you're Leicester City, and missing out for 2 consecutive seasons, a few seasons back on Champions League football has obviously set them back, unfortunately. And winning the Premier League, if those players are still at the football club, resulted in bonuses and higher wages, and you have to live by that now. So it's a big wage bill. It's a big investment in the club's future, and it affects the now. And that's why Leicester are in so many problems. But when you look at the now, and I think Everton, the same, it's a mess. They could go down, but they're moving into a new stadium. And when you're trying to protect the now, selling isn't always the best idea when the now that you've got player-wise, like Tielemans, Maddison, can keep you up. And Leicester's priority is to move away from danger. And if they think that Tielemans can help them do that, letting him go on a free might be a better bit of business than selling to a suitor. So with Tielemans and Arsenal still on the radar, Arsenal's tactic, if they come in for Tielemans, will be to get him on a free because they know that Tielemans would like Arsenal and they've pre-agreed terms dating back to last January with Tielemans. By pre-agreeing terms, I should clarify because it gets misquoted or misunderstood. That just means that the player thinks that the package is broadly acceptable and has intimated if a deal is struck that they will join. It doesn't mean they've signed any kind of pre-contract with a view to him being a free agent. So it's important to make that distinction so I don't get quoted as saying that Tielemans has already signed pre-agreement. He could sign 1 million of them. He could agree to lots of different deals. Pre-signature is a completely different thing. So if, for example, Newcastle said to Leicester, here's 10 to 15 million, that would put Arsenal in a difficult position because they'd either have to go to Tielemans and say, we are definitely going to come in for you, but only as a free, can you wait? And they're not that concrete yet because they've got lots of different options. Or they would have to say, yikes, we want Tielemans now, we're going to bid too. And then Leicester would have a decision to make because they would have a choice between money or no money and losing Tielemans now versus in the summer. But all of that's hypothetical at the moment. And from Arsenal's point of view, he's on the radar. He's been an option for a long time. They know they can get him, but they haven't moved at this point. And there's obviously more value in Tielemans from Arsenal's perspective, financially speaking, moving in the summer versus now. But as the market moves, we wait and see. And this is what's brilliant about January as it gets towards the end, that there's so much late movement and it's such a short window. And we're now in the phase where we're seeing the fruition of early business and of pre-planning. Then it will lull, or it usually does anyway, between the middle of January and the last week of the window. And then you start getting movement and clubs miss out on target A and they come in for target B. Clubs get an injury during the congested fixture period and they decide to sign someone they weren't planning on signing. Clubs realize because of how results are going that they need to spend and they weren't planning on it, etc., etc., etc. And this creates a bit of a scramble. So Tielemans to Arsenal earlier than expected could come because another suitor bids. It could come because of an injury. It could come because of how results go. It could come because Arsenal are just waiting and waiting and waiting until the very last day of the window. And then they say, we're going to try our luck. And you have to, as a journalist, use your sources to predict the direction the market is going to move in. And right now with Arsenal and Tielemans, the tactic is not to spend, it's to get him on a free. But in 2 weeks, that might change because of other things out of Arsenal's control that move in the market. And we're obviously seeing that with Mudryk and Arsenal and Chelsea as well. An unexpected twist that won't necessarily alter Arsenal's number, but might alter their tactics because they're now not in a one-horse race for the player.
You know what, Ben? A lot of people saying that the orange writing on your wall back there is Mudryk has wrote his signature in the orange Shakhtar.
It's not the orange writing at all. If I move to the side, amazingly, because I'm in a hotel because I've been down in London covering some stories and games. If I move to the side, maybe actually first put in the comments what you think it is, and then I'll move to the side in about a minute, and then we'll see if anyone can actually guess what it is. It's not writing. And I'm not sure anyone will guess what it is, but feel free to have a stab at it. And then maybe when we get to the end of the show in a few minutes' time, I'll move to the side.
I wanted to ask you a few quick fire questions because I know you got to go soon. There was a little story yesterday about Declan Rice to Arsenal. Not sure about the link. I know he's always heavily linked with Chelsea. Have you heard anything about that to Arsenal, or is that just paper talk?
Declan Rice is going to be quite an open race in the summer, and West Ham are resigned to losing him. And even though last summer they were very bullish, asking for in excess of 100 million because of the resignation and the player desire to play Champions League football, and he said that at the World Cup, Declan Rice's fee will be somewhere in the region of 70, 75 million. Of course, West Ham might try for a little bit more, but I think suitors like Chelsea that have been working on it for a bit longer, and even Manchester United, really feel that he could be available at a far more reasonable fee. And that definitely creates a window of opportunity. And Declan Rice really admires Arsenal and what they're doing at the moment. And the feeling is quite mutual. So there's nothing significantly advanced on the Arsenal end, but they don't really have to worry about entering the race just now because it's only going to take place during the summer. So I think it's one to watch after the window shuts. There's definitely some substance in the Arsenal links, but we have to be very clear that Manchester United and Chelsea are further along at the moment. But one thing that might play into Arsenal's hands is that Rice, as I'm told, ideally would prefer to stay in London. It's not the only determination, but these elite level, high value players that are in demand tend to, and Bellingham will do the same, create lists of what they want and score them. And then they get two ways of looking at a move. One is on the football side, and obviously the financial package that comes with it. And the other is all the other factors. And does their gut instinct match almost the points total? And Erling Haaland did this. He made a very dispassionate points list on a variety of different things. Some of them you'd be able to predict and say would be obvious, and others were quite random. And if you score everything on what's the club like, what's the manager like, where did they finish, what's the package like, who's paying me the most, who's offering me the least, what's the shortest contract, what's the longest contract, but also what are the teammates like, what's the dressing room like, how many players do I know, how far is the training ground from where I'm going to live, where am I going to live, who's driving me into training, all these different things. And then on the human side, where do the family live, where does the girlfriend live, what does she want, and so on. These can all be factored into kind of an overall score. And sometimes we forget that much like all of us taking a job, when we do so, we think about our family, we think about the city where we're living in, we think about the overall package. So it's not just a case of we're flying, they're not. We've got this, another club hasn't. We're paying more, another club isn't. There's more finesse to it. And Arsenal could well come into the conversation with Rice, because fundamentally he wants Champions League football and he wants London. And that will help Chelsea, but it could help Arsenal, because Arsenal are near guaranteed Champions League football, for me anyway, clearly not mathematically yet. So. And Chelsea are going to massively struggle. So is that going to play into Rice's thinking? But Chelsea will offer Rice a longer contract for sure than Arsenal if they bid, and Manchester United if they bid. So I think it's going to be an open race. And that will come from the fact that there's real opportunism in the market to get a reasonably, I think, bargain price for Declan Rice. I know some might turn their noses up and say, how can anyone call 70 million a bargain? But he was 120 million only 5 months ago. And yet that was a warning price to stop any bids. But I think for the player he is, for the age he is, for the talent he is, and the fact there's not that many specialists in that position at his level and with Premier League experience, I think that, was it to be 70 million, that is a very reasonable price. And for a club like Arsenal that will be able to spend more in the summer, assuming they do get Champions League football, watch this space, because he certainly won't be out of their budget.
And just quickly as well, I wanted to ask you about, a lot of people, when looking at this Mudryk thing, people go, well, if that don't work, Wilfried Zaha, nothing in that, 6 months left on his deal, hasn't signed. Any rumours of him leaving in January?
Nothing yet, really. What we are, I think, moving towards with Zaha is a loan option, possibly. Somebody that wants to come in and give him the opportunity to play football at a high level, in all likelihood because of the deal situation, with an option to buy. Haven't heard too much on Arsenal and Zaha at the moment. Maybe it would have been a little bit different if Eddie Nketiah hadn't come in and done very well, because when you looked at that Gabby Jesus injury to begin with, the immediate reaction was, we need an out-and-out replacement. And Nketiah's come in and I think scored 3 Premier League goals off the top of my head. And maybe that just convinces Arsenal that if they bring in more of a Mudryk or a Felix plus Nketiah, they'll have enough to continue their charge for the Premier League. So we wait and see on that one. But I personally, even though it's always floated around on the agent side, because again, Zaha's in London. Zaha wants to have one big push at potentially Champions League football. He wants to join a big club. So I'm always hearing this: Zaha to Chelsea, Zaha to Arsenal, Zaha to Manchester United even, which would be quite an interesting one, I suppose. And fundamentally, it's just one of those at the age of 30 that would be seen by a lot of these clubs as quite short-termist. From Manchester United's point of view, they would be returning for the player because he was there between, I think, 2013 and 2015 before he was loaned to Palace and subsequently ended up joining. But if it was to be Zaha and London, you're going to hear a lot fueled. And this also plays into the fact that when a contract is running down and a player's future is uncertain, you get these narratives out there because it's leverage. It's leverage back to Palace. It's leverage to force a club to move in the market because there's a lot of interest. But I don't think at this stage Zaha to Arsenal would be any kind of priority. But only my personal opinion, for all the clubs I've mentioned, it would make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. I think I need to let the Zaha dream go. People are saying I've got to let it go. He did have a good season last year, but I don't know. He's out of contract in the summer, so maybe you never know. Marok said, never ever sent a super chat, Big C. You deserve it, my bro. And the orange thing on the wall is a face and a tap. So are you going to reveal it, Ben? Because they've all been throwing in. People have said Pele, the Queen, a map of London. We got no. Someone said Jamie Vardy.
It is actually Jamie Vardy. I'm staying in a Jamie Vardy hotel. No, of course it's not Jamie Vardy. You're all too gullible. Somebody got it right, actually. It's the Queen of England, believe it or not. If I come kind of this way, you'll get a much clearer vision. And you see the red is actually the hair and the crown. And then just below it is the eye and the mouth. So it is the Queen of England.
The Queen of England. There you go. People have been on. I've got to let Ben go because he's got some work to do. Really appreciate you coming on, Ben. If you send me your TikTok handle after, I'll put it in the description because a lot of people saying they want to follow you on TikTok and keep up to date with what you're doing. So really appreciate you coming on as always.
Absolute pleasure. And I hope that Arsenal have a good window and a good second half of the season. And once again, Happy New Year to everyone.
And you, my friend. Be good to get you on before the end of the window if we can do that as well, if you're free. So, yeah, I'll keep in touch. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and appreciate Ben giving up his time. And I will see you all soon, people. Bless.